Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. What you're watching is my Conditionals and Booleans Masterclass. So in this video, what I'm going to do is just kind of really go in depth with like if statements, switch statements, what's truthy, what's falsy, also Boolean operators, etc. Really kind of flesh out a lot of these things about creating conditional stuff and conditional logic in your code. So first, let's just talk about what is a Boolean expression. A Boolean expression is any expression that when the expression resolves, it resolves to true or false. So there's math expressions, there's Boolean expressions, there's string expressions, and that just means some code that ends up in a thing. So for example, so I want to just say const expression, meaning this variable is going to hold the result of an expression. And just to kind of illustrate my point, and we'll just keep console.logging the result of the expression. So if I say 1 plus 1, this is a math expression, or a numerical expression. It's going to result in a number, okay? So that's a math expression. Okay, so if I do this, node scratch.js, see I get the number 2. Now if I say 1 plus 1, so since this is a string, and I'm adding it to a number, JavaScript is going to be a little unclear on what to do. It's going to be like, is this a math expression? Is this a string expression? And this is where it becomes important to kind of know JavaScript in particular and how it sort of tries to figure things out for you. Like JavaScript, other languages, when they see something like this, they're like, I'm not going to make an assumption. I'm just going to throw you an error saying mismatched types. I don't know what to do with this. JavaScript is very friendly. It's like, I'm going to try to figure out what you're trying to do. So it's going to assume that you want to do a string expression, and it's going to actually turn this into a string and add these together. So what? I should get like the string of 11, and that's what I get, the string of 11. Okay. Now, if I did is 1 greater than 11, the string of 1 greater than 11, even though this is a string and this is a number, the minute it sees a Boolean operator, so these are any operator that's asking like greater than, is it equal than, is it not, it's automatically going to assume that this is a Boolean expression, and it's going to figure out how to take the result of this and turn it into true or false. So it's going to be like, okay, well, I need to figure out is this greater than this. So I'm going to assume that underneath the hood, it's going to take sort of like the numerical Unicode number of this and see whether it's bigger than this number, which I'm assuming it is. So I'm going to assume that this should resolve true, but we'll see. Oh, it's actually false. Okay, so maybe treating strings as non-numerical. Okay, so point is that whatever expression you throw at it, JavaScript is going to try to figure out what kind of expression you're trying to make, and see it does turn it into a Boolean expression. So just kind of knowing sort of JavaScript's behavior and thought process, because it's never going to throw you an error from mixing and matching different types of data, like other languages would. Okay, in languages like Python, you have to explicitly make sure that everything's the same type. And in like lower level languages like C, C++, Go, Rust, not only do you have to make sure that everything's the same type, you have to declare your variables with typing, etc., etc., etc. So JavaScript is very friendly and flexible in that regard, but that means you kind of have to get a feel for how it assumes things. Cool. So we kind of understand like assigning an expression. So now that you know what I'm doing here, I'm putting an expression and we're console logging it. Now there's lots of Boolean operators. And again, whenever JavaScript sees a Boolean operator, it's going to automatically assume I need to figure out whether this is true or false. So if I were to do 5 greater than 7, that's not true. That's going to be false. But if I did 5 less than 7, that's going to be true. Okay, if I did 5 is less than or equal than 5, I'm going to get true, because even though 5 is not less than 5, it is equal than 5. So that's true. If I did greater than or equal than 5, that still would be true. I could see, are they equal to each other? Now, here's the thing. I could do triple equals. Now, and that doesn't really, and that's called strict equality. That's going to be true, and actually this will be true either way. if I just do equality, so most languages just have this. What happened is that when JavaScript was created, it had this equality, but in JavaScript they did something that you don't do in other languages. You make the string version of a number equal to the number version of a number. So this, with 2 equal signs, is true. But with 3 equal signs, it behaves more like other programming languages where these are not the same. So just keep that in mind, because there might be a time where you need to check if the string is the same as the number. And there might be times where you really need to make sure that they're treated differently. So 3 equal signs, 2 equal signs, they have a slight difference in what they consider falsy and truthy. And you'll see that word used a lot, truthy and falsy. It just means things that are like that will resolve to true versus things that will resolve to false. Okay, so 5 equals 5. Okay. And then there's the not equals operator. So I can say like, so if I go back to that, Control Z. If we did first not equals, well, again, there's the normal not equality operator, which again comes from the same issue with older JavaScript, where strings are treated the same as numbers when they're the same number. So these things are equal, so this would be false because 5 is equal. So in that case, this is asking, is 5 not equal to 5? But if I do strict inequality, so in this case, the string of 5 should not be the same as the number of 5 because it's strict inequality. Now I get true. And the cool thing is we can do multiple operations. So I can do like, if I went back to this, we know this is false. But if I do this, this is or. So I can say or is 5 not equal to 5. Now these are both false. Okay, so this is going to resolve as false. This is going to resolve as false. So these resolve first. And then we check and then what this does, it checks is either thing on either side of it, did either of them resolve to true? Which neither of them did, so that should get false. Now if I change this to strict equality, this will be true now, but this is still false. But since one of them is false, it'll still give me back true. True. And then I can also do and. So now both have to be true. And I can stretch this out. I can do and or, and or, and or. You can make it pretty complicated. Okay, and now it's false again because one of them is still false. So you can do some pretty complex Boolean expressions. Now the next thing is the way if statements work. Okay, so you've probably used an if statement before, and it's probably pretty straightforward. On first thought, you're thinking, okay, well, if a Boolean expression, you could just write a Boolean expression right in here. You could do that. And what it does, it takes whatever you put in here and resolves it to true or false. But you could also just put a variable in there. So I could just put expression. Now, so it's basically saying, if whatever's inside expression resolves to true or false, and again, what if, well, we'll go through that in a second. So then again, we have here what's true, and if it's false, we'll do this. So here we'll just say console.log, it's true. And then here we'll do console.log, it's false. Okay. So right now we know that this expression was false based on our last check, so I should get it's false. But now let's try something funky. What if I stuck the number 0? Okay, you're probably thinking, well, that's not really a Boolean expression, it's just a number. How is the if statement supposed to evaluate a number? Well, whatever you put in here, it's going to by force try to force it or coerce it into a Boolean. So here's where knowing what's truthy and falsy really matters. So in this case, 0 is going to be treated as falsy. So when it comes to numbers, see 0 is false, but literally any other number is true. So it's true. And even negative numbers, -5. It's true. So the only number that's falsy is 0. Okay, you're going to find this a similar thing with each data type. So if I do a string, an empty string is false. See, it's false. But literally, if I add a space to it, it's true now. So literally every other string other than an empty string, just two quotation marks, will be treated as true. And we know between true and false, the words true and false, those are pretty straightforward. Which one will be treated true, which is false. Also, null. Null is treated as false. So the absence of a value. Or undefined. And this one's pretty important because this is a really useful trick. See, if a variable doesn't have a value, it'll come back as undefined, which will resolve to false. So a really good way to check if a variable doesn't have a value, okay, so for example, if I do an object, so if I make this an empty object, an empty object or an empty array is still true. Okay, there's no situation where an array or an object is false. So see, it's true, but that's the object. The properties of the object are still treated as individual values. So if I said expression.cheese, which is a property I never defined, that's going to give me back undefined, and undefined is false. Okay? Now, why is that cool? Because you can use it to check if a variable exists. So maybe sometimes you think a variable exists, but it doesn't. I can actually now use Boolean expressions and if statements and ternary operators to check, wait, does this variable have a value? No? Okay, then do this instead of that. Okie dokie. So that's a pretty cool thing. But again, even an empty object or an empty array will be treated as true. And the reason being is because technically there's still a value, because the value of the variable isn't the contents of the array or the object, it's the memory address. So the memory address will always exist, okay, and there will always be oh yeah, and then I don't think you can even, but I think trying to compare them will always be false. So if I do array equals array, I'm pretty sure this ends up being false. Let's just double check. Yeah, it's false. Because even though these are, to you, on the surface, these are both the same, these are two unique arrays, and they represent different addresses in memory. Okay, so they're both unique as far as the value that the variable holds, okay, or what the array is. So this is a kind of an also a typical thing you'll see. People will create variables for options. So let's say like we wanted to have like red. So we'll say const red equals, and we'll say an empty object. Const blue equals an empty object. Now I don't care what this empty object, I don't really care so much about this empty object. What I do care is that each object I create is unique, in the sense that it has a unique address in the memory. So that means blue and red are not the same thing. So if I did red equals blue, I'm still going to get false, because these are two unique objects. Okay, and I can use this to my advantage later, where basically if I want to really make sort of a unique value, if each very unique value got its own empty object, I can use that variable kind of as a, you're only really referring to this thing when you use this variable. That's more of an advanced technique, but something important to appreciate. I'll kind of come back to that when we get to switch statements. And then let's see here. So next, what I want to do is let's just show you how we can make this if statement more succinct. So this is all nice, but look how many lines it takes. A quicker way of writing this is what's called a ternary operator. So this same thing would look like this as a ternary operator. Now the syntax is this: expression, so whatever your Boolean expression is, question mark. So basically the question mark is the same thing as the if. The expression is the same thing as whatever's inside the parentheses. After the question mark is what you want to happen if it's true, so the true part. And then, so that would be the same as this set of curly brackets here. And then anything after the colon is the same as the else expression over here. So the same thing as above would just literally look like this. The expression variable, question mark, console.log, it's true. And then colon, console.log, it's false. So literally this line here is the same thing as these several lines over here. So ternary operators are pretty sweet because they allow you to really fit a if statement in a more succinct space. And another cool thing about the ternary operator is that there's no curly brackets. So since there's no curly brackets, you avoid some scoping issues, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. But just run it, and you'll see that you get the same result twice. So see, it's false, it's false. Now let me explain to you sort of the cool difference between if statements and ternaries. So again, this is a ternary operator. When you write an if statement like this, this is just a standard if statement. So let's say I want to do this. Const, let's say if, and we'll just say if true. We're not going to even worry about an expression right now. If true, I want to say const cheese equals Gouda. Else, I want const cheese to equal, this says Gouda. Let's fix that. Okay, const cheese equals Munster. Okay, so here's the thing. And then you notice like the IDE has this like grayed out. That means that it's impossible right now with the way I have written the code that this is ever going to happen, because this is true. And this will always be true, which means this line of code will always run. So this is unreachable code. So it's just little things like your IDE will drop. Specifically, Visual Studio Code will drop hints, which is cool. But I'm doing this intentionally. So, but the idea is that now let's say I want the console log the value of cheese after the fact. Now watch what happens. I get an error. It says cheese is not defined. You're like, wait a second. I thought you defined cheese right here. Well, const and let, so whenever you declare a variable with const and let, they're block scoped, meaning they can only exist within the curly brackets. So that means literally the minute these curly brackets end, cheese just evaporated into thin air. So that's the problem with just a traditional if statement, that there's just these curly brackets, and then you run into an issue. So theoretically, what I'd have to do is I'd have to declare these with var, which we generally kind of want to avoid using because they're a little too flexible. So if I change this to var, then it'll work because var is not block scoped. Or what I could do, the other option I have, is declare the variable before the if statement using let. Because if it's declared out here, then it just exists because it existed before the curly brackets. I could also do that. Okay, so you see, either way, it still gave me Gouda, but neither of those solutions I'm quite a big fan of. So when it comes to assigning the value conditionally to a variable, ternary operators are probably a lot better because I can do something like this. I can do const cheese equals true, question mark, and then just say I want it to be Gouda if true is true, or Munster if it's false. And see, that looks a lot more, takes up a lot less space. It's kind of pretty obvious what it means. Hey, if this is true, then assign Gouda, otherwise assign Munster. But there's no scoping issues. Cheese just now exists because there's no curly brackets. So that's pretty nice. Okay, you escape that whole dealing with block scoping issue. So that's another pretty cool thing when it comes to ternary operators. Now, next, let's talk about switches. Now, switches aren't necessarily conditional in the same way that an if statement is conditional, where it's checking if something is true or false. The way a switch statement works is that you're going to give it a value. Okay, so now let's do this. let's say I were to create like a colors object. Let me think here. What would be a good? Actually, we don't even need to kind of cross that bridge right now. We just need a thing. Okay. So switch. So switch, what you do is you pass some sort of value into here. Could be anything. Okay. So we'll just start off with the color red, the string of red. Now it doesn't check if whether red is true or false. What it's going to do, it's going to check to see if switch of red matches many different cases. So what you write here is like case red, which means if the thing passed into the switch equals red, okay, and then you put a colon there, and then we write the details of our case. So in this case, it's just going to console.log. It's red. And then you put what's called a break statement. The break statement just means stop looking any further. You found what you're looking for. Okay, so then after the break statement, we'll do another case. Okay, and then the next case is, we'll say blue. Console.log. It's red. No, well, let's say it's blue. Then we break that one. And then you can make as many cases as you want, but eventually you make a default case, which is just called default. Okay, and this is what happens if none of the other cases are true. So console.log. I don't know this color. And this is kind of nice when you're like, you know, let's say you ask the user for a command. So you say, hey, the user, like, type in, you know, J for jump. Type in B for something. Type in S for save. And then you want to do is you don't have to do like a whole bunch of if statements, like if it's S, if it's J, if it's this. You can just do a case statement, pass the string in, and check it against like the options that you planned on having. Makes it a lot easier. Cool. And I don't know this color. And then let's just run the code. So right now I passed in red. So we take a look here. I passed in red. It's red. And then if I change this to blue, okay, and this could be the result of a variable. So I could have a variable here called const color. I don't know what color the user chose. So maybe the user clicks on something and that changes the value of this variable. So say color is red. And then this just always just runs off the color variable. It says what color is the color variable. It's red. It's blue. And then let's say we make it a green. Well, I never made a case for green, so it should hit that default case. Oops. And see, I don't know this color. Now, there's another way where you can get the kind of the same effect using objects. This actually was one of the biggest epiphanies for me once I saw like this being done and thought of like what you could do with it. It's pretty cool. So this works fine. Okay, you can use switches and they're great. But here's another way you can kind of achieve the same effect in a simpler way. Okay, so what I do is instead I'll just make an object called color processor. Okay, and this is just going to be an object. And instead what I'm doing is I'm going to say, you know, there's a property called red. That's just a function that console.logs. It's red. There's a property called blue. That console.log. It's blue. Now the only downside to this approach is that there is no default case because it's not a switch. So I can't make this catch-all expression. So in this case, if I did this, since it's an object color processor, there's a secondary way to access properties. I could pass a string to square brackets. So I could just pass the color as the key. And since I know that they both have a function, I can then invoke whatever function is at that key. And see, like, this takes up a lot less space than the switch. But I'm going to get to the same place. So I go to node scratch.js. Oh, color processor is not a function. Is it not? Oh, because it says green right now. See, that's the only issue with this, is that there's no default case. So I'll show you how you deal with that in a second. But then what you do is, let's say if it's red, it's going to run the red function. See, it's red. And if it's blue, it'll run the blue function, because this string matches this key when it's passed into here. So it goes blue. So I can just pack this object with functions for every scenario that I want, and I don't have to really worry. Well, again, it's just a little bit more succinct. Okay, it's like a little bit, I can write it in a little bit less space. Now, if I do want to control for that default case, then what I do is I just do this. I can just do color processor. I use a ternary operator. So what this does, it checks to see if there's a value for that color. So again, I'm taking advantage of being able to check, because if there isn't a function for that color, this is going to return undefined, and undefined is falsy. So I'm taking advantage of that whole falsiness from before. So then if there is no color, I'll just do this instead. Console.log. I don't know that color. So this is like a little bit more stuff going on, but again, a little bit more succinct, but this does the same thing as a switch statement. If it's red, it's going to run that function. If it's blue, it's going to be that function. And if it's not either, it's going to do this. Okay, this ends up in the same place as we did with the switch. So now if I change this back to green, color processor, oh, I spelled it wrong. Processor, let's run that again. See, I don't know that color. So now there will be no situation where I get an error. I can give it any string that I want. It'll either be one of those two colors, or it'll be, and I've definitely found some pretty nice uses for this, especially when there's like a lot of options. I found that this can be sometimes a lot quicker to set up. But again, you know, the switch statement kind of has all that structure built in with you. You don't have to think about like, how do I set up a default statement? Or, you know, but this is another way where you can get to the same place. And the cool thing here is that you can just really kind of match all sorts of things over and over again. Cool. And other cool things you can do is, like, you know, do loops when you loop over something and then have the switch statement. So let's say you want to like go over a large string of letters and you're looping over a bunch of letters, and you have a switch statement to like swap out this letter for that letter and that letter for this letter, and it's just kind of running through the switch statement and altering each letter one by one based on which letter it is. So there's some cool uses for that. But yeah, so that's pretty much like the world of ways of trying to do like logical stuff. So none of these were loops. All of this was just trying to do like branching paths. So you could do with an if statement, but a more succinct if statement is using a ternary operator. You could use switch statements, and a more succinct way of doing switch statements is using objects with you know, dynamic keys, which is what we did here. Also keep in mind like what things are falsy: empty strings, 0, null, undefined, false. The difference between equality, strict inequality, inequality, all those things. But I mean, after this video, I think you should have a much more solid idea of, you know, how to take advantage of sort of like conditional logic in JavaScript, and just a little bit more about how JavaScript behaves. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you head over to devnursery.com and alexmercedcoder.com to sign up for the Slack and Discord channel. Have a great day, and I'll see you around.